This is a cemetery where a lot of my family is buried. In fact, most of them are buried here, including my grandma, my uncle, my father, and then a lot of the relatives, second and third cousins and things like that. And just came by today to say some peace and to comment on all these people dying here in Utah from prescription drug overdose. This is my little brother Justin. Justin died at 16 years old. This one's hard for me, but you know, there's some people here that know Justin and know what happened before he passed away. And he had the police going to several of his little friends' houses and asking where Justin was, what he's, you know, where is he at, where can we find him? And you know, 4 or 5 of these friends that he had his parents get a visit from the police. Instead of just calling Justin's parents or going to the school and figuring out how to get in contact with his parents, you know, but they knew his name and they knew how old he was, and there wasn't a big, you know, issue with finding out how to get a hold of Justin. But yet they went to all of his friends' houses instead of just going to the school or doing this discreetly or coming right to us. And then I think it was 7 or 8 months later, we never did find out why. In fact, my mom and my sister called the police. I'm sure my sister would testify to this, and I'm sure some of his friends would also testify to this, that you know, nobody ever knew why the cops were looking for him. We called the police. They never did figure out who was looking for him or why. They thought there was a detective in Springville. He lived in Mapleton at the time. They thought there was a detective in Springville who was doing the investigation on something, but they didn't know what, and they never did get a hold of us to let us know who and what was, you know, the issue. So anyway, 7 or 8 months later, Justin has a prescription now, because, you know, they were probably looking for him because he was smoking weed. He smoked weed like I did when I was a kid, at that age. And anyway, he was probably being investigated for something like that. But you know, when his friends stopped hanging out with him because his friends' parents told their kids they couldn't hang out with my brother anymore after what the cops had done. You know, they were worried that their kids were getting involved in trouble, so they stopped letting Justin hang out. So then Justin didn't have access to marijuana because his friends shut him out. You know, and that's my personal opinion on it. So he got these prescription drugs. My mom got him Zoloft and some other anti-anxiety medication, and he was taking those and getting worse. You know, he was getting more depressed. And then he took some of my dad's Lortabs and a couple of those other pills, and he killed himself with them. And you know, one of the side effects of these prescription antidepressants is potential of suicide. And it says, you know, if you feel thoughts of suicide, call your doctor. But it does say that the potential risk of suicide is greater, with which is stupid because they're supposed to be antidepressants, right? Well, for some people, the risk of suicide or of suicidal thoughts are greater. And anyway, Justin killed himself. I'm of a sound mind to believe that if he still had contact with his friends and he hadn't, you know, lost his friends, first of all, he wouldn't have been as depressed. Secondly, he would have had access to safer medications, you know, pot. And I hate to say it, I'm not a big advocate for teenage usage of marijuana. I would rather it be sold to only 18 and over. However, between prescription drugs and marijuana can't kill you, period. It's a proven fact. You cannot overdose from marijuana. But these drugs like Zoloft and, you know, Prozac and all these, they have a risk of death. You can overdose. You know, if you go to the CDC, cdc.gov, or Center for Disease Control, you look that up on the internet, you look up how many people have ever overdosed on marijuana in all of history, and it's 0. You look up how many people have overdosed on prescription medications, tens of thousands. And so there's the difference. Anyway, I love you, brother. I love you, Justin. And I miss you. You know what? 16 years old is not long enough for anyone to live. It's just not long enough to experience life. And this graveyard is full of them. I'll tell you why. See, there's me right there. Brothers of Ryan, Melissa, and Brad. But Utah has a very high teen suicide rate, and Utah uses twice the amount and abuses twice the amount of prescription medication than anywhere in the nation. So, you know, these strict policies they have against drugs in Utah, like, you know, against marijuana, are pushing these kids and these adults to harder drugs like prescription drugs. And, you know, they get addicted to painkillers too when they can't get their heroin or when they can't get their feel-good medicine. You know, they start getting addicted to Lortabs and Percocet and Oxycontin, and that's a huge problem in Utah too. Utah uses twice the amount of narcotics too, so of prescription narcotics. And, you know, that's why this cemetery is full of kids who have either overdosed or killed themselves. Because Utah's really depressing, the way that people are oppressed here. All right, and you know, I don't mind, you know, trying to get people information on what happened to my brother. I'm sure I can get a, you know, written or verbal testimony from some of his friends who got a visit from the police, and, you know, certainly family members that were involved in contacting the police after they did that to him. But, you know, I think that the way that the police handle things, you know, by punishing people before they are even convicted of a crime, you know, punishing people by, you know, from my own personal experience in June, I was holding a sign that said legalize it. Nobody complained about me. There's no police report. There's no victim. There's no witness other than the cop that arrested me, saying that I was disorderly. But they broke my $600. It was actually, I paid $900 for this camera. I figured the used price, the used value of it is $600. You know, they broke my camera and they handcuffed me, threw me in jail. Gave me a Class C misdemeanor for disorderly conduct, and this is the kicker. The original one, the first crime that shows up on the list on my ticket is use of streets without a permit. Seriously, I used the streets without a permit during a parade where everybody else was protesting their cause, you know, and not getting a permit. Nobody got a permit, in fact, during that parade for such events. So, you know, there's all kinds of people doing their own thing, politicians, local businesses, other people with causes, and I get arrested because my sign says legalize it. You know, so they broke my camera, they put me through the system. I had to plea on it. I paid a $140 fine and didn't have jail time, but if they wouldn't have offered a plea agreement and dropped the charge of use of streets without a permit, I could have served some serious time and paid some serious fines. And I did have to hire 2 lawyers, which cost me over $1,000, you know, so they ran me out of money. You know, they abused me, they broke my camera, and they gave me a stupid charge for using the streets, you know, for free speech without a permit. And they don't have any value for free speech here. However, on just a month later, July 20th, 2010, they did repeal that law that requires small groups of protesters to have a permit because of what happened at the parade. And, you know, you can see that in the city minutes of city council meeting at their website, springville.org. You can see the minutes of that meeting where they mentioned the parade incident, which was me. I was the only person to ever get arrested for that supposed crime. And they said, you know, getting a permit shouldn't require a 30-day wait. You know, that's unconstitutional is what the city attorney said, you know, and I agree. It was unconstitutional, but that's why they originally arrested me, and they had to throw on the disorderly conduct just so that they didn't get sued, you know, so that they didn't, you know, lose a court battle over free speech. They had to give me something else to, you know, ruin my case, you know, ruin, you know, my potential case that I would have, because then they can claim that I was disorderly. Funny thing is, there was no witness, there was no complainant, there was no police report filed, and there was no victim. So I think the police need to start worrying about the kids that are ending up in this grave. Nobody should be burying their children, all right? And thanks to police, I think that's part of why they are burying their children. So leave them alone, police, and that's for you.
Do you feel we're any closer to winning the war on drugs based on all of the problems with Mexico and the cartels and the fights over our border and the drugs being imported from Mexico than we were last year? Name me a couple of parents who've lost their lives to marijuana.
Can't.
Exactly, you can't, because that hadn't happened, and there hadn't been a wave, because that's been a constant thing in America since Harry Anslinger, because African Americans used it and saw it as something that was crippling and gave it to the Latin Americans and put an ethnic tone to it. When have we, is there some time we're going to see that we ought to prioritize meth, crack, cocaine, and heroin and deal with the drugs that the American culture is really being affected by and lives are being lost?
The only thing I would say is that you talk to parents who have lost their children to drugs.
Right.
They will inevitably say that they started off with marijuana.
They probably started off with milk and then went to beer. And then they went to bourbon, and then they might have gone to marijuana. The gateway theory doesn't work.
Maybe.
It's a reality. Obviously, we're going to have not going to agree there.